is E&P Reports, a vodcast from editor and publisher. Since 1884, the authoritative voice of news publishing. And this episode sponsored by IQ Audience Plus by Town News. Consumer revenue has never been more important. Digital leaders at media organizations worldwide understand the need to accelerate its growth now. Plus, traditional one-size-fits-all paywalls aren't the answer. They're blunt instruments that treat all visitors the same way. IQ Audience Plus is a smart, dynamic metering solution that empowers media companies to maximize revenue by identifying key audiences, seeding engagement, and growing membership and subscriptions. Supercharge your consumer revenue, grow engagement, and bolster your advertising income now with IQ Audience Plus. Visit townnews.com EP today to learn more. And greetings once again, Mike Linder, publisher of E&P Magazine. If you are listening to us on your favorite podcast platform, please follow us. If you are watching on our YouTube channel, hit the subscribe button below, hit the bell to the right. You'll get an update each and every time we upload a new episode of E&P Reports. We're talking today diversity, equity, and inclusion. And our guests today are Doris Trong, Director of Training and Diversity at the Poynter Institute. Doris, you were also spent a long time, 15 years, as president and a board member of the Asian American Journalists Association. And I think I have this right, that you spent 19 years at the Washington Post, almost 19 years. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. Makes me sound very old.
Not really, but you got to. But finding a home at Poynter must be very, very exciting for you. So you can, because not only are you training, you're in a great think tank organization and sharing with so many other great, educated and learned people. So I think that's wonderful. Larry, you are a partner of E&P. We've already launched a platform with you, founder, executive director of the Diversity Pledge Institute. Before that, faculty associate at the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism and Mass Communications, deputy director of local news and transformation for the American Press Institute. And you spent a few years at various newspapers before that. Larry, does that make you sound too old, or do you feel like that was a comfortable way of pegging your age here?
No, it does make me sound too old as well. If you want to just list one place, I'm okay with that.
I want to start off with a question or a comment. It's a little bit of both to both of you, and I'll see which one wants to field this. Over the past year, as publisher of E&P, and as COVID has slowly become less of an issue, I've been invited to speak at a number of conventions and associations. So far, and I've made a mental list of this, I've been in South Texas, I have been in Wyoming, I've been in Minnesota, I've been in Pennsylvania, and I've been in New York. And I think I'm missing, Florida as well. Added up in the last year, I spoke to professionals just slightly under 1,000, I would say. And I do not know anyone's sexual orientation in that room, but I'll tell you one thing, likely I saw less than 15 people of color throughout that entire experience. Now, does that make this an anomaly, in your opinion? Start with you, Doris, or is that still the state? And I'm talking these are legacy newspaper people. These were the press conferences I was at, if that makes sense. Is that still in a way the kind of the state of the industry, or is I just happened to pick some bad days to be in front of these groups?
Well, I think we need a little bit more context about who was invited into that room. But I think that it's very clear that we need to have more racial diversity and more diversity across the board on a number of perspectives in all newsrooms.
Larry, any thoughts?
No, I would definitely agree with Doris. I mean, it's we're lacking right now. Journalism is lacking right now, especially when it comes to those top positions, when it comes to those C-suite positions. Journalism should be able to do better. It should be doing better.
Mm-hmm.
What would you say to the companies that say, well, I promoted someone on my staff and I made them a diversity director? They still have their other duties. You know, they're still the copy editor, or they're still doing sports, or maybe they're doing that. But now we have a diversity director, so we're all set. Is that enough, Larry? Is that what people have to be doing right now? Is just pick someone on the team, maybe someone of color, and say, go ahead, you got the job?
I'm not a big fan of those positions, to be quite honest. To me, it's not really addressing the problem, and it's kind of just adding the weight of that responsibility, most of the times, to a journalist of color already on your team. And I know maybe, I'm sure there are situations where it's worked out well, but I also know that the life expectancy, or the amount of time people spend in those roles on average are usually under a year, from what I understand. So I don't think that's fixing the problem. I think it's more, I don't even think it's putting a Band-Aid on it, to be quite honest.
Doris, for those that are watching the video version, you have been nodding your head through Larry's comments. Why don't you expound a little bit more on that?
I mean, I would agree with everything that Larry has said, and would note that just throwing an extra title at somebody is not even the bare minimum. It's actually creating a problem. So if you really want to invest in creating an environment that promotes diversity, equity, and inclusion, you have to put resources toward it. And it's also not something that is something to be fixed. It is something to think about all the time, every day. It is something that should be an ongoing concern of every organization that covers news, because it is an ongoing concern of everybody in our audience.
So, okay,
Mike,
go ahead, Larry.
I'll add to what Doris mentioned, resources. I share with folks, I've been contacted about some of those roles. A lot of JOCs, journalists of color, have been contacted about those roles. And one of the first questions I ask is, hey, what's the budget for that position? As someone that's been a sports editor, that's been a news editor, in sports, I had a budget, I had a freelance budget. I had the salary, I had the travel budget, whatever the case may be, there was a budget and it was my responsibility. Except for a lot of times for those positions, there's no budget. So how is this a position that's supposedly equally, if not more important to your newsroom, and yet it doesn't have any dollars attached to it so that that person can actually succeed in that role? So that's my, hey, I'm good with hanging up the phone question when an organization contacts me.
Doris, again, nodding your head.
Total red flag. Yeah, definitely run away if there are no resources. But I think the other thing is, this is not a one-person job. This is an organization-wide responsibility. So expecting to even promote somebody whose full-time job is DE&I does not mean that everybody else can just say, oh, it's Larry's job. It's everyone's job all the time.
All right. So what say you to the old school publisher, or the one who's been doing it the same way forever, who says, look, the content's fine. I just got to get a few people, just a few diverse people in here, so everybody lays off me. Both of you mentioned, and I want to, because I do strongly believe this, if our newsrooms do not reflect the communities we serve, isn't that the most important part of the process? How can you write to your readers unless you are your readers? Am I saying that right, Larry, in your opinion? Or should not the newsroom be a parallel to the community as far as its diversity? Yes, no? Or is that just unheard of?
I'll let Doris go first on this one.
All right, Doris.
Well, I would caution that, because I think that you've got to look at what you mean by diversity. If you are talking about a really homogenous community, then you might have somebody say, my area is 98% fill in the blank, therefore my staff is fine at 98% fill in the blank. You've got to think about what are the perspectives that you're possibly missing by not bringing in people who are very different from the rest of the current staff in some way. Maybe that's age, maybe that's socioeconomics, maybe that's where they grew up. So if you are in a particular region and everybody who's in your news organization also grew up in that region, that's great because you've got that community background, but you could be missing a lot of things because everybody's so used to seeing the things around them in the world in a certain way. So you've got to really think through what are you trying to represent, and also who are the potential members of your audience that you're not even reaching right now because they never see themselves in your coverage.
Larry?
I agree with everything she said. I mean, and I feel like that's going to be a popular refrain on this conversation. But Yeah, I don't think it's just bringing in some, diverse journalists, more diverse journalists into your newsroom, especially at one of those entry-level positions. It's improving your newsroom. That whole idea of, hey, we've been doing it this way for a while, for ages. Haven't we? I think we're learning, we're changing how journalism is done in just about every newsroom. We're changing how newsrooms make money. So it's not, hey, I'm just going to rely on what I was doing 5 years ago or 2 years ago or whatever. More than anything, right now, we know things have to be done differently, and it's either, to me, get on board or get out the way.
I was put in my place on this very platform by Sarah Beth Berman. Do you know who that is, Doris? She runs the American Journalism Project. Larry, it was 2 interviews ago on E&P Reports, and we were interviewing them because they had just helped to assist a huge project, nonprofit, that's launching in Houston. Now, Houston is not a news desert. There's a lot of news sources in Houston. And also the work they've been doing for Block Club Chicago, which is hyper-local news, online only, who won a few Eppies of ours, if I may say. So I said to her, look, I don't go to sleep at night worried about Houston's news environment. Why isn't there more talk about the news deserts happening around the communities? And she said, I go to sleep at night worrying about Houston, because what about the Black reader that's not served, the Asian reader that's not served, the Hispanic reader that's not served? It kind of woke me up, because I'm thinking, with all those news outlets in a city like Houston, I mean, what, 4 TV news stations? I'm sure there's a radio, all news outlet, public radio, not to mention the various newspaper products. Is there still a news desert in either? Okay, let's start with you, Doris. Or occurring even in larger cities when a minority is not being served? I mean, is this something that we have to be more aware of in our industry?
Well, I'm not familiar with the research that you talked about, but I do think that news deserts is maybe too broad a framing here. I think we have to be concerned at all times that there could be some gap in our coverage. And this goes back to resources. We only have a limited number of print pages per day. We only have a limited number of people to put content onto online, where there is no limit of print pages, but you still have a limit of who is going to be making, who's going to be writing the stories, who's going to be producing the videos, who's making the things that go online. So you can't, even CNN cannot cover everything all the time. So I think it's an issue of, how do we as journalists look for those places where there is an audience that needs to have its demands met? Outlier Media in Detroit is a great example, because they do so much work directly with the people who are influenced by something like needing to have their plumbing fixed if pipes burst because of a storm. So that's really meeting people where they are, and when they have that information that they absolutely need, that's critical to their existence.
But if a Houston Chronicle wants to survive the next 100 years, each one of these individual targeted sites or news outlets that grow will eventually hurt their chance of prospering. In other words, what I see is that a legacy media outlet has to serve its entire community, or it becomes niched. I mean, and then with audience being less, which is less chance for raising advertising dollars or losing their influence. I mean, this is what I'm finding to be a little scary right now, is we're not super serving the markets that we have, and that leaves room for a competitor to grow. I mean, I come from the business side. Maybe that's said poorly, but the more pure plays that enter into the marketplace, the less chance for survival. I mean, Larry, does that make sense to you? That one of the reasons you might want to become more diverse is for the future. So you have the market share that you need in order to leverage revenue.
Well, I mean, I think that is part of the framing of an importance of why an organization should care about diversity throughout the company. Is the business model, is the revenue. And I know there's data that supports that, and there's the argument for it. And there's the, hey, it's just the right thing to do. I'm not sure what is best, what is better, but I do think that legacy media, all these other forms of journalism are finding a place, are finding an audience because legacy media neglected that audience for so long.
That's what
and that audience, they are hungry for the news. They're showing that they don't mind paying for it. More importantly, their dollar is the same as the legacy media dollar.
Mm-hmm.
So, these organizations, they're finding an audience, and they're creating a space where, I hate to throw it out there, this inclusive environment for this audience to almost build a community and find the things that they want to read. I think legacy media is still struggling with that a little bit.
All right. So before we get to the solutions, what I'm trying to do is paint the problems. I mean, I want to
also address this before we move on. I just think that we're not talking about a zero-sum game here, especially since you brought up Houston. It is not as though the Chronicle doesn't have an audience. So what it is the Chronicle has to evaluate how it is covering certain things. What is it leaving for the table that created this entry point for these other organizations to spring up? And then how can the Chronicle increase its inclusion and its coverage in a way that makes the audience say, yes, I'm getting my news from a specific niche site, but I can also get valuable information from the Chronicle.
All right. So well said.
And I think also with the Houston example, though, I mean, we did just wrap up table stakes, the team that I was working with, the Houston Defender. So it's not even like the Chronicle is the only newspaper in town. I mean, the Defender does an excellent job. They just finished table stakes. They're increasing their audience. They're transforming how their newsroom is run. They're looking at additional ways to generate revenue. They're evaluating processes, and this is, it's a Black-owned newspaper in Houston. So, it's not necessarily, I think, that there are other options out there.
All right. So now that we've painted a picture of the why, let's get into what solutions are available. I mean, Larry, you and I teamed up about 4 months ago and decided we were going to launch this, I call it a vertical, this resource center, an editor and publisher we call Diversity Spotlight, where you're kind of helping champion a lot of the content. It's at editorpublisher.com/diversity. And then we're also going to be tying in our job board to help find the candidates or help the candidates find the jobs they need. And that job board works with Pointer, and then bringing in Doris. Doris, we want to leave a place there for Pointer's diversity training. And let's start on that first. I mean, if someone comes to you and says, all right, I don't know what I'm doing, I need to have a more diverse environment. Mm-hmm. You just say, great, here are 5 courses, start taking them, or how do you onboard someone who wants to change, mm-hmm. and just first of all comes to you and says, okay, help me. What is the Pointer process for training up a media company into diversity, becoming more diverse, I should say?
Well, it's great when people come to us and say, help us. We're absolutely ready to listen. I think a big part of it is figuring out where they are in their process and what's their commitment to it. What is the outcome that they are most interested in achieving? So the starting point right now since basically 2020, since the murder of George Floyd, the starting point for a lot of organizations is let's talk about race. And that's an excellent starting point. But as we've already mentioned in this conversation, race is not the only way to talk about diversity. So we will try to listen to what the news organization is hoping to achieve. We'll talk with them about how it's important for everybody in the organization to have a sense of ownership in terms of understanding that what diversity is, how that is reflected throughout the staff, how that is reflected in the content that they produce, how that is reflected in the way that they interact with their sources. We also talked to them about whether there might be some systemic distrust with particular communities that needs to be addressed. So there are lots of ways that Pointer helps people think through that diversity, equity, and inclusion is not a checkbox. It's not a checklist either. It is something that you've got to incorporate in your day-to-day journalism the same way that you don't just think about journalism ethics every once in a while. Every decision that you make should be informed with a mindset of how is this advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion? How am I potentially forgetting certain things? How could I add that perspective into other stories or this one?
Larry, I had an interview about a year ago with some folks from Amplify, Ohio. And one of the things that this was an initiative through the local media association. One of the things they said to me is, even if you find someone of color, if I can use that term, that will work in my newsroom, they're leaving because they don't feel that their voice is heard, or they don't feel that it's an environment. Do you have to fix it first before you find the candidate? I mean, what's the process to make sure that the newsroom isn't that what the next step inclusion means? I mean,
think about what you said though just now, is they don't feel like they have a voice. Then give them a voice. You know, that environment needs to change. That needs to be, I had a boss say, you know, he always loved it when employees bought houses because it meant mortgages and they're not going anywhere.
I've heard
All
that.
right.
Yes.
So, I mean, when you feel like you're making a home someplace, you want to stick around. But if you're in an environment where you're just always the one, that's not all that inclusive to me. And, you know, I've been the one in a lot of different newsrooms. So it's fixing that. I think that would be a good start, but it is making sure that fixing that is a priority.
Okay. Doris, how do you help management then shift their paradigm? And whether it's diversity about race or diversity about age or any disparity, how do you fix the management ethic when sometimes a newsroom is just dictatorial? It's top down. And because that's the way we've run it, I've got 2 Pulitzers under my belt, and this is the way I'm going to do it. I'm not putting down someone who wins. Is that a difficult paradigm to shift, or is that sometimes just you have to go? I mean, is there a model or anything that helps that shift happen?
Well, in some ways, you're building the plane while you're flying it, because I think that a lot of things have to change at the same time. And it always is meaningful to the rank and file employees if they see that management is not just paying lip service to something, but putting actual personnel resources and monetary resources and time resources into saying, we are creating this environment that is supportive of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Because what does that mean? You can just say, we're going to be more diverse. That doesn't mean anything. To tell me, how do you plan to be more diverse? What does that mean to you? Does it mean adding beats? Does it mean adding a masthead level editor who is going to be in charge of certain initiatives? What do those initiatives look like? How are we going to measure our success? How are we transparent with people? Are we looking at pay equity? All of these things sort of have to be addressed at once. We are seeing that many shops are unionizing. And so I think that is also part of this theme of people saying it's not happening fast enough at the top. So we are going to use our collective voice to try to make things happen. So if you aren't on board with making things happen, things might still happen. So it's in your best interest as leaders to be looking at how can we be in charge of this change? How can we be leading transformation? How can we have people come to us and say, hey, you all did a great job. How can we learn from you?
Larry, I'm going to bring that question to you as well. What happens when you run into a management environment where change is just hard? How do you have you gotten to a point where you go, oh my God, we just have to fire this guy? We got to find someone else to run the shop. I mean, is there Is this the hardest part of it?
Well, I call that a little bit more of the accountability aspect. There needs to be some level of accountability in newsrooms. If you have someone that is just consistently driving away journalists of color from that newsroom, for diverse journalists from that newsroom, hopefully someone in senior leadership notices and they take action. It's a lack of action that can lead to some of these all white male over 50 departments in newsrooms that not considered DEI a punchline, but it's definitely not taken seriously. So some level of accountability needs to come into play.
Doris, what do you offer senior management at Pointer? Is there a course structure to help that top level guy finally wake up? There's that old joke. How many psychiatrists does it take to change a light bulb? And the answer is one, but the light bulb has to want to change in the first place. I don't know if you've ever heard that, but how do you get that shift at the very, very top in an industry that still remains dominantly white male as far as the legacy industry? I mean, I know there's new startups that are all different, but you're talking now to that senior company. What does Pointer offer? How can you help?
Well, we do have leadership academies for a variety of audiences offered throughout the year. And during the pandemic, we have innovated some academies that are online only, some of which we'll also be offering later this year, even though we're starting to resume in-person academies. And a big piece of working with leaders is asking them to learn about themselves first.
Right.
So we always have people do 360s. We work with people on understanding how they make decisions. We help them understand how other people might make decisions and how, as leaders, they've got to be the ones who adapt, not sort of insisting that other people adapt because you're the leader. And I'm really proud of this, we have woven DEI work even before it became really a part of everybody's vocabulary. We've really woven a focus on diversity throughout all of our leadership academies. Usually there's at least one session that is specific to DEI, but it is a part of how we address things throughout the week of the academy. Is how are you more inclusive of the people in your news organization, and how does that translate into people in your community feeling like this is the news organization to which I want to turn to be most informed?
Larry, you offer counseling, advice, training, whatever you call it, at a senior level as well. How does the process start with the Diversity Pledge Institute? What's your model?
I'd like to say we're just free help when it comes to what a journalist needs, individual journalist needs. We're free mentorship. We help with a little bit of everything from resumes, clips, packages, but also navigating difficult spaces. So, and right now we are putting more things in place so that we offer more training, executive leadership training. We're looking into another model where it's organizations, newsrooms that work with us. If they end up hiring someone that has zero management experience or less than 12 months, we're requiring that organization to get some sort of coaching, executive leadership training provided for that new hire, so that they're not just being put in a position, but also being put in a position to succeed. So it's for us, it's I don't think it's necessarily in the training towards the top, but it's some of the things that we require newsrooms to do to work with us so that we can help them create those more inclusive environments, so that there isn't a revolving door of diverse journalists. I mean, a lot of organizations are focusing on recruiting, but we're a little bit more focused on retention, because
there you go.
If
right.
You're recruiting and you just constantly have someone leaving in 8 months, that's pointless. Sure, you're bringing people in, but nobody's staying. So it really is more about creating an environment where somebody wants to stay.
You made it clear when we first met. I remember way back, and we had our first conversation, that you're going to follow their career after you help someone get placed into that newsroom. Correct? You're going to be there, that shoulder, and you're going to work with the organization and the person so they can buy that darn mortgage, I guess you were using, and have a home.
Yeah. I mean, part of what we do is we require the newsroom we do 30, 60, 90, and 2 annual check-ins with the hiring manager as well as the new hire. And that's done so that hopefully we can help create that bond, help establish that relationship so that nothing is lost in translation. And we tell newsrooms we consider this more of a partnership. Some newsrooms handle that better than others. But the goal is, hey, we're in this together. You don't have to do this alone. You can call us up 12, 13, 14 months down the line, and we're willing to continue that support. And more importantly, 24 months down the line, you're required to talk to us to make sure, so that we can make sure that the journalist in question, as well as the hiring manager, are still vibing, or that they still have that, lack of a better word, good fit.
This is one of the reasons I'm so glad we were able to put Pointer and you together into this new, what I call vertical, or this diversity initiative that we're now launching and trying to maintain, to offer not just news resources, which we're going to make sure we have original content, links to any relevant stories, resources, organizations, what have you. But Doris, we're going to need, and we're working with Pointer and your team to make sure we're always showing the latest and greatest stuff you're offering, because the more training, right, Larry, that these people are getting on both ends of the equation, the easier your job's going to be, right? As you coach them along the process too. So I think this is a good symbiotic, team that we're assembling together. In the model, Larry, would you be able to have the Pointer training kind of go in tandem with this? Is that your plan? Are you?
Hopefully so. I mean, I'm a Pointer training alum. Like right now, I'm coaching table stakes for Pointer.
Why don't you define what that means to someone that doesn't understand?
Table stakes is their program it's a change management program, performance-driven change. So hopefully it helps. The goal is to help organizations learn all the tools that are necessary to survive, and not just survive, excel in journalism down the line. And when it comes to what I've been a part of, I've graduated from the diversity leadership. What was it called back then? The
Leadership Academy for Diversity and Digital Media.
Yes, and even from that interaction, I learned so many skills that I'm using today. One of the coaches ended up becoming a mentor, then ended up becoming a friend. One of my classmates or fellows for that program is now the chair for my board for my nonprofit. Another helped me get started in this and get this whole thing off the ground for the nonprofit. So, I mean, to me, those Pointer trainings, I kind of considered them priceless and valuable. Pick a word, because they helped me get to this space now.
Doris, what a testimonial. That's great. Do you see that happening, that through this interaction? I mean, table stakes and other programs that you offer, that the people mentor each other and stay connected after they go through this?
Yeah, absolutely. So the program that Larry mentioned is definitely an example of that. There are nearly 200 people who are alum of that program now, and it's a program that's only offered once a year. We also have an academy for women and non-binary journalists who want to be leaders, and that has almost 500 people in the alumni network. And so in both of those particular instances, and I think also with the table stakes program, you see that people are returning to each other again and again, especially the ones that they went through the program with. That's like your cohort, right? So there are people that you've already spent some significant time explaining to them what issues you were confronting at the time of the program. They have seen your growth over time. They are able to bring to you the perspectives that they have from their organization. They're able to talk to you about the challenges that they've faced. So I think that that is one of the great, great testimonials for a pointer, is that people meet other people who can help them throughout their career by going through programs.
If someone wants, we have to start bringing this home now. Someone wants more information on the training programs. Obviously, we're going to be offering access to them at editorandpublisher.com/diversity as part of our way of amplifying all of these different initiatives and all these different resources. But how would they get a hold of you guys at Pointer and learn more about table stakes and other program stores?
I would just start by going to our website, and for your podcast listeners, it's pointer.org, poynter.org.
Larry, you kind of gave us the elevator pitch a little of what what your organization does, but can you give it again, really, because you work closely with the candidates, but you also work closely with the places they're going to work. And the way I would define it, I'm sure I'm not doing it justice, is you just make it a great match. That's what I kind of glean from what you do.
Yeah, it's like at our core, we're just a free mentorship program helping journalists, hopefully providing them with all the things they're going to need to succeed. But then we also work with newsrooms in finding, let's call it a diverse slate of qualified vetted candidates whenever they have openings. So we're in those individual journalists' lives, more or less for their career, for as long as they'll have us. And then we're willing to work with those newsrooms equally as long as they want to ask for help or as long as they need help. But we are very candidate driven. We have a lot of rules. There's no ghosting of candidates. They have to let us know how candidates do on candidates we send their way, how they do in interviews, because sometimes folks are just not good at interviews, and that little bit of feedback can help them become better. They can be great at a job or possibly bad at an interview. So we're candidate led, but we do work with newsrooms. But at the end of the day, it's a candidate. We're free mentorship. We're free help.
The Diversity Pledge Institute website is where?
We're the diversitypledgeinstitute.org. Pretty simple. And yeah, please check us out. Or you can just feel free to email me at larry@thediversitypledgeinstitute.org.
Whether they're an employer or whether they're someone who wants to be mentored along the process to get the right fit.
Yeah, we have some other mentorship type of programs, but most importantly, we're trying to help. I'm trying to give back because I've gotten a lot of help.
E&P is honored to be working with both of your organizations. Doris, we really appreciate Pointer support, not only, of course, with your training programs, but through the job board as well. We work in partners with that, so we can get especially in today's work environment where we really have to get the openings out to beyond just the job board and get them on your homepage and get them into the email pushes. So it's just been great, the partnership there. And Larry, I'm looking forward to many, many years of the project as E&P partners with the Diversity Pledge Institute. Thanks to both of you for your valuable time. Thanks for painting a good picture, I think, for what the industry needs to hear. And hopefully they're all going to change that light bulb in time, and we'll get to where we have to be. Thanks to both of you. Appreciate it.
Thanks a lot.